Slow change may pull us apart when the light gets into your heart, baby. Don't you forget about me.
So that was Don't You Forget About Me from the 1985 John Hughes classic, The Breakfast Club. But you're probably wondering, doesn't sound like Simple Minds, and that's because it's not. That is the voice of the man who played Carl the janitor in The Breakfast Club from his album Too Hip for the Room. He also played Molly Ringwald's oily bohunk brother-in-law in 16 Candles. He also called Anthony Michael Hall a Malacca in Weird Science. In fact, we'll examine the word Malacca later. And if you're not careful, he might invite you to a Nelson tradition of hot tubbing, just like he did to Daryl Hannah in one of my favorite movies, Roxanne. And as he learned from the movie Internal Affairs, keep your wife away from Richard Gere. Ladies and gentlemen, and Greek people all across the world, in the spirit of Thanksgiving next week, we should all give thanks to today's very special guest on the premiere episode of the newly named The Tommy Denos Podcast, the multi-talented John Kapelos. My friend, welcome.
Thank you.
So grateful to have you here. Let's talk about the pronunciation of your last name. We were talking about that before we started rolling.
First of all, thank you for such a lovely introduction.
It doesn't do you justice.
Oh,
I know there's a lot more to it, and we'll get into all that, which I'm very excited about. But we're talking about your last name. I prefer Kapelos just because I'm Greek, but we talked about what you preferred.
Well, my family prefers Kapelos too, and
Okay.
I got into the habit of saying Kapelos because my mother, who moved from Boston to London, Ontario, just after the war, marrying my father, in an effort to anglicize the name, said, well, when you go to school, John, you're Kapelos at home, but you're Kapelos at school.
Mm-hmm.
And I sort of kept it. And then when I became an actor, in the 70s, everybody was Travolta. They're all everybody was like ethnic thing.
Right.
And, well, you're Kapelos. And my brother's Kapelos. I have a niece who's a big broadcaster in Canada. She's a Kapelos. But I've kept on Kapelos. Now, I'm sorry that it jars a few people. But, it's a conversation piece at least.
So it could be like my buddy, one of my best friends. He's Alexopoulos.
Yeah.
But of course, he's Alexopoulos to non-Greeks.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like...
it's... when I was in high school, they called me crap a lot, and
of course,
and a lot of variations.
I know
therein.
we always get some kind of variation of our name that's unflattering.
And when I was at Second City, this is a story I don't tell that often, but I did a photo shoot for a medical company, and it was. So people were having trouble pronouncing my name, and I said, it's Kapelos. And they said, well, and then they sent the photo to the theater, and they opened it, and it was for ostomy systems, right?
Mm-hmm.
That replaced people that have, issues.
Right.
And so I said, well, started calling me John Kapelostomy. So, that's a horrible story. Sorry, Mom.
No, it's okay. Yeah, like I was saying, mine was shortened from Kopendinos. My Papu, my grandfather, came here from Greece.
Yeah.
Shortened it to Denos. Mm-hmm. But that still gets botched. It's Denos, Denos, Dens. We'll leave out the O.
And growing up where I grew up, it was massacred deliberately. But we can avoid it. Well, we just went through
We just went there. Well, so you were so nice to talk to me on the phone this morning. You welcomed me to LA, which I really appreciated. And you asked me if I had seen a show that you did. I want to start because that's what I watched this morning called The Trial of Socrates. Mm-hmm. You sent it to me. I got to watch quite a bit of this morning, and I was floored by it because just the whole concept of it. So you're basically playing Socrates, and you're indicted for impiety, being unfaithful to gods, corrupting the youth.
Corrupting the youth of Athens.
And what I found also funny was that you were compared at one point to TikTok. Today, they compared Socrates to TikTok. So let's talk about that. Let's talk more about that.
Well, there are two aspects of it. There's the aspect of, what Socrates represents in today's society. And without going into left-right politics too much, there is a sense that he was an adjutant. Mm-hmm. And to the post-revolutionary Athens that was kind of dwelling in more of an authoritarian sphere, he was perceived as an enemy. and he was put on trial for being corrupting the youth of Athens. In other words, getting them to think.
Right,
Now,
right.
it's very difficult for me to overlay that to present political days, but let's just talk about the process of doing that. I was asked by my kumbaro, Dino, Armiros, who is part of the Hellenic Museum in Chicago, whether I wanted to do this event. And I don't know whether you're familiar with in WGBH in Boston, I think in the 80s and 70s and 80s, 90s, they would do these trials where they'd take professors from various universities. I think Lawrence Tribe, a big Harvard professor, was part of this. And they'd have trials in American history and whatever. They'd restage them.
Right.
You know, famous trials throughout history, throughout American history. And it was really an interesting forum. So the Hellenic Museum adopted this and said, well, what we're going to do is get 2 law firms, one pro, one a con, and we'll do the trial of Socrates, and the audience will vote on it at the end. So they said to me, well, would you like to do this? I said, well, yeah, I'd be challenged. They said, well, you can just improvise Socrates.
I was about to ask,
Are you kidding me? Well, the process was deep. And, you know, I didn't improvise Socrates. What I did was I studied. I worked with a person who was a scholar. And I basically had to, you know, provide my answers in an improvisational form, but I had to, improvisational way, which was, you know, I responded in kind. I opted not to do an accent, a Greek accent.
Yeah, right. You didn't need it, I didn't think.
I don't think so. And the only thing I said to them is that, you know, I had to have a beard.
You certainly, you definitely looked like him.
Well,
you certainly looked like him.
If you put on, if you're asked to play Socrates, you got to put on the Socrates suit.
Yeah.
You know, you got to put on the beard. And I mean, yeah, and I think looking like him, but also putting it in more of a contemporary context in terms of, you know, not trudging in there like, you know, with a thing and going, who are these people? You know, what year is this?
Yeah, almost like a parody of him, yeah.
Yeah.
Or a caricature.
And also, I mean, so there were lots of things we had to play with. The interesting thing about it, and if anybody ever gets to watch this, it was presented on WTTW in Chicago and PBS.
Okay.
Is that the 2 law firms were facing off, the Clifford law firm, and I forget the name of the other one, I'm sorry, but the other law firm were facing off in court the next day over a very, very big trial involving Boeing and the families that were suing Boeing. So it was an incredibly, you know, and that was a big money, very emotional, high stakes lawsuit. So the night before, these 2 firms were battling it out in this context. And the next day they were going to bat for Boeing and for the, you know, different parties there. So there was an extra sort of added element of drama to the whole event.
So I'm watching, I'm thinking, God, all the dialogue that's in this performance, but like you said, though, it wasn't really, you didn't really have a script for it.
No, it was a trial. And, what I got prepped for were questions that are going to come at me for the most part, and the questions that the other side's going to come at me with. Now, the other side didn't give me their questions, but I knew that what my side was going to do. The Clifford law firm, oh, darn it.
Oh, you're fine. Don't even worry about it.
No.
You know, I did a mock deposition. So my agent back home sent me on a mock deposition at the University of Houston, my alma mater. It's where I went. And so I got, you know, all the notes, the whole deposition the night before, whatever it was. And so I had to study it. And I was never in a trial, I've never been in a courtroom to do anything like that remotely, but I had to look at all the facts. It was difficult to do. I mean, you have to really familiarize with all the facts, and then you have to be ready for all the questions. You have to really know, you know, all the facts about it to be able to answer intelligently. It was tough. It was tough to do.
And you don't want to be, you know, the guy, the actor, the person in my position that is, you know, I'm going to turn off my phone, ladies and gentlemen.
It's okay.
This is the way we do it. You know, this is the annoying thing about this.
If it's your agent, take it.
No.
Always. If it's your agent.
They never call me anyway.
Take the call.
Okay, Siri, shut down phone. And it says, hey, Siri, power down phone.
Just to confirm, you want to power off this device?
Yes, I'm confirming. You know, that's what gets me about this. I'm in a movie theater or something, and I want to shut it down quietly. Just to confirm. It's like, you know.
Now, how would Socrates have done with that?
Socrates, I'm telling you, would not have, well, I didn't do it with an accent, but Socrates, I think, eschewed things like that.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But what were we talking about just now?
We were talking about the script. Well, not the script, but just how you were having to prepare.
Just the notion of going into this, with a base of knowledge about Socrates and then having to deal with it was challenging enough.
Yeah. I also want to say last night on the plane, I had about a 4-hour flight. I got to watch Love Shot.
Oh yeah,
I watched that down to watch them. I loved that movie. What a fun movie! What a fun movie to watch. And you played not a very nice person in that.
I love doing that movie.
It was great.
I love doing that movie. Stephen Fine, who directed it, really enjoyed it. Everybody, all the actors in it. It's fun. Yeah, I wish films like that got a little bit more opportunity. But
I mean, just what a great concept.
Mm-hmm.
So if you've never seen it, basically there's a hitman who falls in love with a woman who he's supposed to.
Yeah. The old Hitman movie thing. I mean, you could do a whole afternoon of Hitman movies.
And of course, there's a connection between that and John's character, but watch it and it's
he
really
falls
fun
in love
movie.
with his victim, and it's a really good movie because it was made on a shoestring with actors that really were passionate about it, and I really enjoyed doing it. And I love playing those guys.
Where y'all shot in Koreatown or
yeah, just shot over here, just blocks from, well, not blocks, but as the crow flies, maybe 3 miles.
Right. It was such a fun movie.
Mm-hmm.
Really fun movie. So I want to talk about, so when you and I talked on the phone the very first time, I guess been probably a couple months now, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And I mentioned Jeremy Piven. I mentioned Jeremy Piven because when I think of him, I think of you. Because you guys, in every movie y'all are in, every show, y'all steal the scene. Every single time, and y'all both just have this presence where people want to watch you. They're interested to see what you're going to do. So that's kind of the comparison I make. But it's like everything you guys are in. Now, is that by design? Are you there to try to steal the scene, or are you just trying to tell the story the best possible way that you can?
Well, I think the latter for sure. And I can't talk for Jeremy, who I like and enjoy, and I knew his father, who was a really fine actor, Bern Piven, who was, I think, for a while he was the Uncle Ben in Uncle Ben's Rice commercials, but he was really, really good. Good stage actor.
He had a theater in Chicago.
That's right. And and also the Cusack family.
Cusacks,
yeah. We're involved and friends and, professional. I have to be honest and say the whole notion of being scene stealing, I grew up in a theater community where there were a lot of very big and professional and professionally trained English actors that were adept at the whole art of being involved in a sort of very competitive theater scene where one often resorted to what one might call scene stealing. Working at Second City in Chicago, yes, in a theater environment, and then all the various theaters I've worked in since, you learn how to hold your own in a scene. But Tommy, I would never, ever say that I deliberately or try to steal a scene because that's not really team playing. And I also think that you just try to be the best in the scene. Right. If, let's say, they cut towards you or make the scene, but, I'd have to say I'd have to be really modest and say I try not to do that. Yeah. I just try to be the best I can be in that scene, in that situation. And the issue for me has always been when you start out in the movies, I wanted to do bigger parts, but they always give you small parts. Even to this day, I mean, they go in, okay, he'll be done in an hour. I just did the Lincoln Lawyer, and I'm in it for like 12 seconds. But so, I mean, when you're doing parts that are not main parts, you kind of sort of have to do this look at me thing. And when I started out initially, there was a bit of that, but then I realized the less you do and the more you just do the part, the better it is. And I think that that's probably what, happens is like, wait a minute, that person's good. Oh, so instead of, I would prefer to look at it as cream rises to the top. People see that in that scene, that actor's doing very, very well. I watch a lot of stuff, and I'll see actors and they'll make themselves known, but when an actor actively tries to steal a scene, I've been in situations where when I'm talking, the other actor will start doing stuff that is drawing attention to them. It's like, well, unless it's organic in the scene, then you're just doing it to, bring attention to yourself.
Right.
So I think that I don't like that per se.
Exactly.
And I think that scene stealing is a negative part of the acting world.
Yeah, like I said, but you're just so memorable in anything you do, because your performance always stand out. Obviously, Breakfast Club, which we'll get into.
I'll take, but I hope I'm not stealing every freaking scene. Although, there's that expression where, you make yourself known. And for the most part, that's how you get a career, is you get to, get bigger parts and get more noticed.
So maybe early on, it's kind of like, like you said, you want to be noticed, but then the more you do, then it, you kind of, it's like, okay, let me start just telling the story the best I can.
And you go to Love Shot, like I had a lot of time in that movie to do a lot of different things into what I would call stretch out. I could do a love scene, I could do a threatening scene or a killing scene or all different sorts of stuff that show different colors, as they like to say.
Right. I want to talk about, in the introduction, I mentioned the word Malaka, and I'm sorry, Father Michael, I'm sorry, all my priests at home, but let's talk about the word Malaka, because you said in an interview your mother hated that scene in Weird Science, the Malaka scene. Let's talk about that real quick.
Well, my mother, I don't know that she actually hated the scene. I think my mother liked the movie and she liked the scene, but she didn't like the fact that I used the word Malaka.
She's being a Greek mom.
Yeah, being a Greek mom and also being the president of the Greek Ladies Philosophical Society of Canada at the time.
Yeah.
She was a pretty big cheese in her wheel of friends and, acquaintances and, in her circle. She was a president of the Greek Ladies Society of Canada. And so when I used that word, I don't think I gave her a heads up. Maybe afterwards I told her.
Was it improvised or was that in the script? Was that your idea to use that line?
All good questions, and it's sort of somewhere in the middle. It was not in the script. It was not entirely improvised. It was conceived of on the set. Okay. So whereas John and I would be talking, and he'd say, well, what would a guy say in a situation like this? And we went through a variety of words. And I said, what a Greek guy might say. And you go, oh, yeah, what is that? And I go, well, it's basically a jerk off. Pardon.
Sorry, Father Michael. And
but
yeah. Well, we have to dissect the word.
There are worse things on TV nowadays.
But really, it's almost like saying, hey. Well, now it's like saying, hey, man, what's up? You say, hey, Malaka, what's up, Malaka? That's how my friends and I use it. Almost like saying it's almost like a greeting or like.
Well, it's akin to bro.
The bro.
Like
bro.
Hey,
yeah.
or worse. But anyway, yeah, it's just a tag that you give to friends, and it can be, jerk off. In Chicago, the term jag off is like, hey, jag off, whatever. I think I've done enough.
Yeah, I think we spent enough time on the word Malaka. So
but my mother was apoplectic, which I believe is a Greek word, and she was not entirely sanguine. Another word. It was not something we. Talked about. My mom always wanted me to enunciate in the movies. So my mother was very much like a head. So why don't you talk clearer in the films?
You mentioned that, yeah.
And I go, Ma, this is the way people talk, Yeah. I think the first line I ever did in the movies, my sister faulted me, was, I guess the people who thought we had to get married feels pretty stupid right about now, huh, Padre? That's in 16 Candles.
Yeah,
when I go, I guess the people that thought we had to get married feel pretty stupid. Feel pretty stupid right about now, huh, Padre? And not an easy line to rip out.
No.
Over, just sort of like this, and then be sort of like funny about it. I did it, but then my family goes, "What did you say there?"
So, would you say your family's probably your harshest critic when it comes to your performances?
I don't want to. I love my family. I don't want to alienate them more than I have in the past. But I don't even think that they there used to be a time when people would call me up and say, hey, you're on TV or this and that. I don't think they watch much or pay attention much. So I think that people get inured to the fact that you're on television and they'll go, oh, yeah, I saw you the other day. It's like, and I never really expected like my aunts, when they were alive, would say, "Can you tell us when you're on TV?" And I go, "Well, I'm on TV every day.
Every day.
Somewhere." But I think my sister and my brother, when they see me, they always are very complimentary.
Yeah. Well, that's good.
But my sister's my brother's not a big TV watcher, so what can I say? Or a movie watcher or whatever.
Well, so staying on the subject of Greeks for a minute. So you said in another interview that you were never like a Greek's Greek. What does that mean? What does that mean? I don't want to get you in trouble, but I found it interesting. I found that an interesting thing to say.
Well, a friend of mine said to me once, "You can be king of the world or king of the Greeks." And I said, "What do you want to be?" And I said, "I'd rather be king of the world." I said, "Well, sounds like a Greek, but but if you want to be king of the Greeks, I think Greeks are a difficult, wonderful, unruly, personality disordered, flawed but fabulous, fascinating community. I was born Greek Canadian, and my first language is English.
Right.
And as much as, and I love being Greek, don't get me wrong, but I think my first card is not as a Greek, but as a North American. Mm-hmm. And I have always been a little bit sardonic about my community. I'm the youngest of three. My brother and sister towed the line more, and I'm sort of the rebel. So the Greeks always looked at me sort of askance. And when I was in Chicago, I did things. I did this thing called the Goddamn Greek Blues, the Halstead Street Blues, and where the chorus was God damn it, which, along with Malacca sort of put me in a special category with the priests of the time, although they would come over and bless my apartment.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I have a good relationship with the church. I'm not a lapsed Christian by any designation.
Do you go to St. Sophia at all? Do you ever go to the church? Or?
I used to. I go to a different place now.
Okay.
I go to a different place. I'm not telling you. I used to go to St. Sophia. I think that sometimes the Greek community in North America, which is the diaspora, is not one that I'm really, I'm not. That's not me. I'm really more. I have more symmetry with people like you,
right.
And my friends in the Greek American community are more the American Greeks, and we speak Greek or we understand Greek, but our I want to say loyalty, but our, Now I have a lot of friends that they spend a lot of time in Greece. They go there to Athens and stuff. I'm more of a North American.
Right. So you're not one who goes to Greece every summer or like a lot of people do. No,
I have cousins that do that. I have relatives that do that. My godson does that with his family, like 2 months in Greece every summer. I mean, and it's something that we never did growing up, because when my dad came over, which is going to be 100 years ago next year, he came over in a boat from Piraeus to Marseille to Halifax to Montreal. And then when he got off in Montreal in 1926 or 5, he ripped a hole in his pants and he cut his leg open and he had to, bind himself up. And he was met by his brother, who was not particularly nice to him, and they drove to London, Ontario. Well, when I say not particularly nice, he was like, "Oh, what'd you do there?" And he was 12 years old. And it was tough. And he put himself through public school. He worked in restaurants, lost part of his finger in an ice cream machine when he was about 14. I mean, but he had 3 jobs and he put himself through university. And the minute he graduated from university in 1938, he went into the Royal Canadian Air Force, because if they put you in the Army, you would be dead.
Right.
Within 2 years, you're at the front line. So the Air Force, and he was also graduated from university. I'm giving you the shorthand of my dad. He was an officer. He was a sergeant in the Air Force, and then went to Europe for 6 years, and then came back, married my mother, and then raised a family. So there was very little time for going back to Greece. And after the Second War, right, he wanted to go back to Greece. He hadn't spoken to his parents in 5 years. And as anybody from that epoch knows, I mean, the Greeks were treated like a lot of the nations in that horrible conflagration were treated very roughly by the Nazis. And so he didn't know whether his parents were alive or not. So he was supposed to go to Greece after the war, but they sent him back to Canada, and he was part of a science crew. And so another officer friend, he sent him with a movie camera. We have movies of the village in Greece in 1945, 46. And there's my grandfather and my grandmother, and they were alive. And that was the first thing he knew of them. But, the whole notion of flying back to Greece every summer, I mean, that's really a phenomenon of, I would say, present day times. In modern times, he was living in modern times, but people didn't do that then. The first time my dad went back to Greece after coming over in 1927 was he took my mom in 1963.
Okay.
And then he took me in 1971. And my father said that Greece had changed more between 1963 and 1971 than it had between 1927 and 1963.
How so?
He said that the 60s and the technological revolution, the junta, the king, the whole political changes and the societal and the revolution of the 60s, the country had really altered much more radically than it had in the previous 40 years. The war had changed, it scarred, it was hyperventilated by, the new Europe, money, growth, tourism. Greece in the 60s became the Greece that we sort of know now.
Exactly.
More fun-loving. But, Greece in the 50s and 40s and 30s and 20s, that wasn't a place where you wanted to go back every summer to.
Now, think about it. My parents are both from the States. My grandparents came from Greece. And I think about that time, that generation that came over and just, it was all about survival for them and the struggle and how hard the times were back then, when they just want to come here, take care of raise a family, take care of their family, and that's what they're all about. And I don't know, like now today, I don't know if you still see that same kind of mentality with people who, like I said, it's just a different generation. I think it was just a different time with the family dynamic, and I think work ethic was different. I think work ethic was, you had to have work ethic back then. I just think it was a whole different mindset.
Yeah, but then. Also, and we're going back in time now. Yeah. My mother was born in the U.S., so my mom was an American, and my father was born of Greek parents. And her father died when she was young, and her mother spoke no English. So my mother was the eldest of three, so she became, the interpreter, translator, the parent essentially. And raised her younger sisters. So she had a great deal of responsibility on her shoulders and had to deal with the two worlds, the Greek and the English world. Both my parents were ambidextrous linguistically. They both could speak English and Greek without accents. They were both. So people in our community growing up in London, Ontario, would come to my father and my mother for advice, consultation. There were no lawyers in the community. Both of them were educated and well-spoken. So between 1948, 47, 48, and 19 whatever, when my father passed away in 1980, my dad must have sponsored at least 500 gentlemen into the United States. So when he died at his funeral, there were all these men with their wives and children that had, because there was no lawyer in London, Ontario, he helped them do the paperwork and all this. And, with the Canadians, and how the Greek clotheslined, somebody would come over from one village and they'd bring over a son and a relative and a cousin. And, so these communities built up and loved and revered were my parents. And
God, how great is that to have an impact on so many people?
And there's a book about the Canadians and Greeks of Canada. My father's mentioned it. And, I'm proud of my family were involved in the community, and being Greek is very important. I, on the other hand, I was honored recently by the United Hellenic Voters of America 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks in Chicago. It was a lovely event. They honored me as a Performer of the Year. So Greeks do recognize me, and but I think it's more my positioning myself as an outsider more than the Greeks thinking of me as such.
Right.
I think that's kind of my own sort of rebel aspect. And, at my age now, I have to fess up to certain things,
Right. It's funny. We have a lot in common because I'm the youngest of three, by far, 14 years and 12-year difference between my brother and sister and myself.
Well, that's bigger than mine, but mine is 7 years, and it's 6 and 7 between my brother and I.
And you have an Aunt Fanny, if I heard correctly, right? In a interview, was it Aunt Fanny?
Well, we have a funny there are a couple funnies, but one in Florida and one in Boston.
Well, I had a Yaya Fanny, yeah. So we had something in common there with the family dynamics. That's pretty cool.
Well, I mean, if you don't have a funny or a Panayota or a Chris or a George or a Pete or a Gus.
We have George and Pete. So I'm Thomas George. My brother and dad were both George Thomas.
Well, my
So we
brother's
have
George Thomas.
There you go. Look at that.
And I am John Thomas.
Look at that.
And my father was Thomas George.
You got to be kidding.
And yeah.
Wow.
My dad was Thomas George Kapelos, and my brother is George Thomas, the eldest son. And I'm John Thomas, named after my mother's father, who's the one who died when she was young.
My mom and my dad both had brothers Pete.
Pete.
Both, yeah.
Pete.
Panayoti.
Olala Panayota. Well, that's Panayota's my grandmother. Well, yeah, we can go on with the name.
Yeah. So I want to stay on your dad for a second. So you said in another interview that you kind of had an interesting relationship with your dad, but he was all in favor. He supported you wanting to be an actor. And I found that really, really cool because he go ahead and go into that. And
Well, my dad was really, my dad did not want his clothing store to be, the be all and end all. He said it's a conduit. If your brother wants to do this, your sister wants to do this, the store is, if you want the store, you can have it. I had really no interest in taking over my father's clothing business. A man did who still has it to this day, and I still have a relationship with that store. But I said to him one day I wanted to be an actor, and he looked at me with his sort of doleful brown eyes. He went, "Oh, God. All right. If you're going to be an actor, then just be the best." And I said, "Okay." He said, and you've got a year. I said, "What do you mean I got a year?" He said, "Well, remember when we went to New York, the anniversary, my parents' anniversary was about 4 years before, a big anniversary, a wedding, and we all went to New York and saw a few plays. And every restaurant we went to in New York City, the bartenders, the waiters, or the waitresses were all actors or wannabe actors or directors. What do you do, Chip? Oh, I'm an actor, sir. So my father said, I don't want you to be a bartender. I don't want you to be a waiter. If you want to do that, there are plenty of Greek restaurants around town where we can get you jobs at, right? And you can become very good at that, but you have to get a job as an actor. I said, really? He said, yeah. I mean, So I looked around, and within a bit of time, I got my job at Second City. But my father that was a realistic view of it. I mean, I don't know how realistic getting a job within a year was.
Right.
But it certainly lit a fire under my, ambition. and it also, I think, it was a fortuitous piece of information. Because I tell you, Tommy, I did try to be a waiter, and I was horrible.
I've done it. It's terrible.
I know people that can do it, that are dexterous at it, that become really good at it. I mean, I've said this in other interviews, and I said this during my acceptance speech at the Hellenic thing, because there are a lot of restaurateurs out there. I was the world's worst waiter. And I mean, I can play a waiter, sir, may I take your order? And, that came naturally, faking it. So at the beginning when I started working in the restaurant, they go, "You're Greek, huh?" And I go, yeah. So after like 3 weeks of me working there, they go, "You're Greek?" They just couldn't effing believe it.
What restaurant? What was it?
It was George's Spaghetti House in Toronto.
Okay. But this thing is so cool.
Great restaurant.
It's in Chicago. Okay.
No, it was
in Toronto.
George's Spaghetti House in Toronto. I don't know whether it's there anymore.
Okay.
It was a real operation.
I just think it's so great, though, that your dad said, get a job as an actor instead of saying, get a little steadier job as a waiter or something like that. I think most parents would have said, yeah, get something like that. But your dad said, no, if you're going to be an actor, go be an actor, get a job as an actor. Yeah,
and he also, we also left the door open, like, I said, and because I'm a negotiator by nature, and not a haggler, but a negotiator. Subtle difference. We beat the Persians.
I saw 300.
But the notion is that if I were to go if let's say the year didn't work out and I were to have gone back to school, then I would have gone to film school. I would have gone into some. You
would have still done something.
I would have become a director or something. I would have had to have gone into that field. So I was driven to become an actor because, for the most part, I think it was my strongest suit. Loved to play music, but realized at least I made the judgment at the time that this is what I wanted with my stronger suit. And I think it's cool that my dad did that. I think that I'm very, very fortunate and lucky to have had Second City and John Candy and Joyce Sloan and Bernie Sullins and all the people that sort of came into my life in the future. And Joyce and Bernie were at Second City in Chicago. And, this sort of path that lit up.
You said John Candy was like a mentor to you, right? He was a pretty big influence on you.
He was, I don't want to overstate it because I didn't know him very well, and I wasn't like, hey, but he was a kind man, and he was a very good teacher, and he was also generous with his mentoring, which, a lot of people just aren't. They don't share their professional knowledge that easily. They like to, as I say, keep their soldiers to themselves.
It's funny you say Second City right on cue because I've got something. I don't know if you've seen this before, but I brought this. I'm going to let you have this. Have you seen this book?
Oh, yeah.
You have this book.
I do.
You do have it.
I do, but...
And I've kind of bookmarked it here, so you probably can't, I don't know if you probably can't see it in the camera. It might be kind of tough, but I'll let you, if you want to read that. There's a little biography about John in this book, and I'll let him kind of read.
About John Candy or me?
Mr. Kapelos, my guest.
Oh, me?
Yes, sir.
He's another local favorite who began his film career while still at Second City. He has been in films like Thief with Jim Belushi, Dr. Detroit with Dan Aykroyd, Class, 16 Candles, The Breakfast Club, Nothing in Common, Roxanne, Internal Affairs, The Shadow, The Relic, and Deep Into the Ocean. John played Detective Don Skanky in the first 2 seasons of Forever Night. Other TV credits include The West Wing, The Practice, Seinfeld, Home Improvement, and the HBO movie The Late Shift.
Now, that's quite the resume. And I mean, that's just part of it. So when you look at that and you read that, I mean, how do you go back and reflect on what you've done? I mean, how proud are you of what you've done and the people that you've worked with? You've worked with some legends. Not everybody gets to do that.
Well, I mean, yeah. Danny Breen, Tony Rosato, gone now. Weird picture they have of me.
How old were you in that picture, do you think?
23. Yeah.
In fact, we'll have to put that picture up in the, we go edit this and so you can kind of see. But there's the book, Second City, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I loved my days at Second City. It was a lot of hard knocks and a lot of. I can't say that they were all great, And apparently, there's a podcast out, where people are talking about their Second City days. So I think there's probably enough of that. I'm not in the podcast, so they have a lot of people that talk about their experiences, and I think it's just a wonderful training ground even to this day.
Talk about Del Close. I didn't really know anything about him until you had mentioned him in another interview. So he was an improv actor, but he's also a coach, right? And he talked about 3 things that I saw in an interview with him. He talked about something that improv actors need to do: monologues, scenes, and large improvisational games. So I think what he talked about. So why are those elements important to improv actors? If you can kind of go through each one, for actors listening, why is it important to kind of practice those elements?
Well, I mean, Del was, first of all, a very charismatic, quirky, strange, talented, yet remarkably flawed and drug addicted,
Yeah.
misogynistic, sometimes cruel, incredibly funny, very smart, but for the first one to tell you that he is. I liked him. He liked me. I thought he was dangerous. I thought he was unhappy. But I also thought he was incredibly free. He was a big influence on a lot of people at Second City because he had this sort of guru-esque quality, which I've come to mistrust. But
How come?
because I don't really believe in gurus. I don't believe in these people that, in the acting community, there are lots of them. And sometimes they can cause great harm to actors, I think, and also become egomaniacal in ways that don't help actors improve. So, but that's my outsider aspect. And go back to the Greeks. There are two types of Greeks, the ones that stay and the ones that leave. And the ones that leave and travel, the wandering ones, tend to be a little bit more loners, in that regard. You see that.
Right.
And I think that there is an aspect of that to me. And particularly in show business is tough place to apply, And oftentimes the people that you think are going to be receptive to you aren't, So, when somebody says, "Oh, that person's a Greek casting director, they're going to help you," look, maybe not.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter.
It doesn't really matter, and sometimes it just don't work that way. It's like saying, "Hey, you guys are two similar magnets." And you go, "Wait, we're the same pole."
Right.
We're not,
Exactly.
But I'm digressing terribly.
No, you're fine. No, you're good. No, let's go. That's fine.
But Del was really remarkably influential to a lot of people. He directed me in a couple of plays, reviews at Second City, which are shows. And then he got fired because he said something crude to one of the women in the company, which was really stupid. And, I think the problem with a lot of people who buy their own PR, John Belushi, who think they're that guy on the screen and that they're, not a human, think that, they can do anything in the world and it's not going to kill them.
And this happened right across the street from where we're at.
Yeah. Oh, God, yeah.
If those who don't know, we're right across the street from the Chateau Marmont, where, if those walls could talk, the conversation that would take place from those walls, all the stuff that's gone down there. It's crazy.
Yeah, it was a dark, 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 dark period. And I was in the theater when John died and we were at his funeral and stuff like that. It was a tough time.
Staying on improv, so, I kind of, not grew up, but I watched a lot of Whose Line Is It Anyway? What did you think about that show? Because you came from Second City, so what did you think of Whose Line and that style of improv that they did? Were there similarities to what y'all were doing at Second City, or is it just kind of a different kind of show?
It's the gamification of the
Right.
improv
Okay.
world and making it into a TV show and it's done very well for the people involved. And I think that it's one of the many sort of spin-offs. Like Second City itself has never been entirely successful at launching its own TV shows.
Okay.
So the sons and daughters of the Second City, the children of Second City, in other words, Laura Hall, who is the wonderful pianist, and
Yes.
and Ryan and all the people who's a Second City alum, and all the wonderful Second City people that work on that show. That's a kind of a Second City show by proxy. So, and then you look at Saturday Night Live, of course, with all the Second City alums. But then you go to other shows that were developed by Second City people over the years. I'm trying to go back and think of a few major ones. There are wonderful actors from a generation like Eugenie Ross Lemming and people that worked with Norman Lear and all these other
Right.
people. So, it's so rich in the tapestry of the culture. And, Jack Burns and Avery Schreiber, and Jack Burns worked on the show Fridays, and Fridays begat Larry David, and Larry David begat
Of course.
Seinfeld. And, so
Yeah.
there's
Wow.
the influences go deep. And Second City people, if they don't make it in front of the camera, go behind the camera a lot. I mean, I don't know whether you ever saw a really wonderful movie called The President's Analyst
Okay. I haven't
many
seen
years
that.
ago, but the director of that was a guy named Ted Flicker, deceased, long gone, but wonderful actor. I mean, a director, and he used a lot of Second City people. Now it's just, it's a garden of people, and some of them are unsung. Since I left Second City, of course, you've had Colbert and Carell and just
Right.
a whole garden variety of fantastic people, Tina Fey, et cetera, et cetera.
Do you recommend for actors who are starting out to take improv classes? Because I know you also have your thoughts on acting classes. I want to talk about also.
Well, I was going to go back to answer your question about monologues.
Yeah.
I mean, what Del was talking about monologues and scenes, I think he was trying to be adept at all this stuff improvisationally, because when you encounter the text, because the theater people, there tend to be walls between various disciplines, between ballet and opera and theater and theater. And,
Exactly.
And the theater people have a sort of a bit of a wall against the improv people. And some of the improv people come out of a shaggy sort of lack of discipline and don't like the theater people either. So there might be a subtle rivalry between the two. But, in a theater situation, it's sort of verboten to improvise or change the text.
Right.
And so when you come from an improvisational background, you approach the monologues, you approach the stuff in a way that it's not as daunting, to learn a big monologue, because coming out of an improvisational background, you have a sense of how to deliver things. So working with text becomes a little bit more a fluid process, at least for me.
So, Gladiator just came, new Gladiator, and all these videos, a few clips of Denzel Washington resurfacing where he's talking about acting and how he said that every actor needs to get on the stage for, to get stage experience. What do you think about that?
I have worked with actors that have never been on a stage, that are only film actors. As good as they are, I think, pardon me, they could be even better. Because the stage provides, I agree with him, the stage provides such an ability to explore the stuff you're doing, right? And biggest thing about the stage, and people will rarely say this out loud, is that you make mistakes. Because the only way you get better at anything is if you make mistakes. Now, at walking, you don't want to trip too much because you hurt yourself. But, as a child, you get better. But, and I know it sounds really fundamental, but at anything, you want to make mistakes. And the beauty about when I started, at least in Chicago, Toronto, and touring throughout the Midwest as I did, there were a lot of shows that were terrible, Tommy. There were a lot of commercials I did on local TV stations that are unwatchable. But you make your mistakes, because by the time you get to New York or LA, as it was told to me very early on, you better be camera ready, because they don't give you more than a nanosecond of their attention.
Right, exactly.
And then go, oh, I pass on him. And on to the next, because they've got a sea of people. So unless you go there and you're ready to, do your thing. So a lot of people come out to New York and LA, where they're going to find a teacher, get a thing, maybe get an agent, and they're going to learn their craft here. No, not the way J.K. did it. For me, I had done 9, 10, 11 movies before I even moved to L.A., So if L.A. didn't, my trajectory when I came to Los Angeles in 1986 or so was that if this town isn't going to validate me, screw it, I'm already an actor.
Right.
I'm not going to come out here and go, oh, please, Los Angeles, make me an actor, which unfortunately people do. Now, some of them hit pay dirt, and a lot of people hit pay dirt, and it's one way of doing it. But, I don't know at the end of the day whether it matters whether you've worked on stage or not to certain actors, because they're just keyed into that camera and maybe the sense of what other things they want in the world, fame. But I think with the qualitative performers that want to get better, stage is an incredibly important element in their work.
So when it comes to acting class, I know Christian Slater said something years ago in a book about acting class. He said, just don't even do it, basically. He called it malarkey. He said, either you can act or you can't. So what do you think of, are actors, are there people who are just born to act? Maybe quote unquote natural actors, or who's someone who comes to mind?
Well, there are naturals. We're born to act. River Phoenix was born to act.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly right.
But other things got in the way. There are really, really good people that have natural talent. But if you look at certain people, when you're blessed with natural talent and you're given a lot of kudos at the beginning of your career, that can be a really dangerously spoiling thing.
Right.
It can curdle the soup or the whatever. And, there are different ways of looking at your career. People always said, and I always felt like I had the chops, and whether I was a natural, I had the ability that was natural, but that takes you to a certain, and then understanding your craft and then respecting it, and then not defecating on it by,
right.
Like what John Belushi did, is like you get really, really good at something. I can say this because he's like, and then you start doing a lot of drugs and you forget about why you're good, and all you're doing is trying to do this thing that you think you can do. Mm-hmm. Now you can just phone it in, but all you're doing is getting high. Yeah. Like if you don't look after your garden, you lose the muse. It goes away. I don't know if you know any great musicians, but if you don't pick up your guitar or your piano after a week or two, not that they've lost it, but it's tough to get back on the bike.
Yeah.
You got to, and if you don't respect and love the muse within you, it goes away.
It's like
it
athletes.
goes away.
It's like athletes who are born gifted athletically, but if you're not going to train, if you're not going to work, hone your talent, right? Then obviously you're not going to last. And that's what separates so many people who are born with an ability and who are actually trying to polish it and sculpt it, as opposed to those who, I've already got it, like you said, kind of mail it in because I'm already at this level, right? So what do I need to work on? I just got it, so I'm not going to put the work in.
The people that I see that become, and this is a blanket statement, but mm-hmm. the ones that I respect, the actors, the ones that really, really deliver over a long arc of a career, have an engine inside them that doesn't stop. And they're doing it for the right reasons. They're doing it not for self-esteem, not for kudos, not to show their friends in high school, hey, look at me now. Or look at any, I'll show them. You get that out of your system pretty early.
Right.
And the other thing you get out of your system is like, why am I doing this? Because my family's not calling me up and saying they're seeing me. Okay, well, I sloughed that one off a long time ago too.
Yeah.
I'm doing it because I'm out here doing it.
And you just love to do it.
And I love to do it. And then, all of a sudden, honestly, when people recognize my work, I don't expect it. I get amazed by it. And I think it's beautiful. I watched a really interesting interview with David Lynch last night with my wife, and it was just such a wonderful experience because the guy is just so open, mm-hmm. and that's kind of the way I feel to that. I have been around actors that get pissed off if they don't get recognized. What? Yeti, why?
Yeah.
Because they're going to throw dirt on us eventually, and we're all not going to be recognized.
Well, I'm glad you said that. How you appreciate when people talk to you about your work and everything, because that's probably that's another reason why you've lasted so long, is because you've got that humbleness about you. I don't think you take yourself so seriously, right?
I take myself seriously. But
in what way? In what way?
Oh, I'm dead serious. If you're going to go up against me for a part, I'm competitive.
Right.
And I take myself seriously. I take my work seriously. But what I don't try to do is, and when I was younger, is I don't try to be so self-important about it that I have to let you know
how
effing serious my work is.
Exactly.
How much I'm doing what I'm doing.
You've worked with actors
Tommy,
like that. Yeah.
How good I am. You know, like
Yeah, I should just know, right?
well, yeah,
Yeah.
and also, you don't, ego is very important in this business. I'm kind of reacting to things because I do take myself seriously,
Right.
but I don't take the unimportant stuff seriously.
That's what I'm
And like,
talking
there's a
about,
lot of
yeah.
unimportant shit that people say about you, but because I've had a past, I've had bad things happen to me, and I've done things that have not necessarily I'm proud of in my past, and I've had to reckon with that. So there's a wonderful expression that my father taught me from the poem "If" by Rudyard Kipling, which was a poem that he lived by. If you can meet triumph and disaster and treat both impostors the same. And the thing I try to do in life is like, okay, something bad happens. All right. Something good happens. All right. And if you can temper that with even praise and compliments, I'm sorry. Am I?
No. I'm just trying to process what you said. No, because it makes sense. But like I think about kind of what you talked about, it made me think of this something that Michael J. Fox said about how back in the 80s it was more difficult to be famous because you had to be talented, whereas opposed to today where people are getting famous just. You post something on YouTube, you post something on your Instagram, and now all of a sudden, you got overnight success. But it's true though, because you had so many. When I look back on that, we'll talk about the Brat Pack later too, and all those movies that you did. But just the generation of such talented actors, where you could it just oozed, like the talent just oozed to me back then. And there's talent now, but it was just a whole different generation of actors. In the 80s and 90s, kind of when I was growing up watching, I just think it was a different level of talent, I think.
Well,
my generation.
The taste of the public and what people are propelled into fame for and how they're propelled into fame, it's a very interesting sort of analysis because in the 1920s, people got famous for sitting on top of planes. And, there were daredevils and skydivers and you got famous for flying across the Atlantic, Lindbergh. And, and then now people are famous for being influencers or being on TikTok. So, the nature of fame and how you get famous. And coming out of a generation of actors, I want to go back to the Christian Slater quote because you leave a lot of these things. You ask a lot of these things and I don't necessarily address them. I think Christian Slater is... his mother is a really talented casting person, and I think that he has so much natural talent and came out of a family where he probably learned so much environmentally that there's a certain cynicism about that. And if you grow up in Los Angeles, there are a lot of people that are capitalizing off of actors, and there are a lot of bad coaches out there, and they're more often than not failed actors. Or actors, people that are, I don't want to put the whole profession down, but you have to tread lightly. So his comment is observed. I think it's a little bit of a whitewash, but I would tend to agree with it that you have to be aware of who you study with. But every time you work with somebody, you learn something.
Right.
Every actor I've worked with. I've learned from. And like that's, going back to what my dad says, just get work. And what I realized is like even after a year of getting into Second City, I keep on learning. And that's going back to the notion of I like the actors that, okay, maybe they start off a bit shaky. He was pretty good, but have you seen him now? I've seen so-so. Boy, they've gotten better.
Yeah.
When actors like all of a sudden blossom over the years in front of your eyes, you go, wow. Like Gillian Anderson from, well, look what she's doing. And she was on the X-Files. She was great, but wow. And people they're really showing their abilities and talents. That to me is exciting as opposed to somebody like, boy, they used to be really good. What happened to them?
Right.
They got involved with this and then that happened and then they got hurt and then, they married this person and then they stopped working and then they joined this political party and then, like whatever. It's like, they get diverted, right? But That's why you have to respect musicians so much, people that have to follow that skill set every day.
We talked about learning from people. You learned a lot from Robert De Niro, you said. That was someone who you looked up to, right? Because you learned, I think you said you learned how to, I think you said kind of think ahead a bit of the actor that you're working with in the scene. Am I saying that correctly?
The thing about De Niro is he really taught me, just watching him, that acting is thinking.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of the behavior that you do on screen is the process of you trying to figure it out. And it took me a while to figure that out. But the other thing, I worked with when I did the movie Roxanne, Richard Bruno was a costume designer and long gone, lovely guy, who worked with De Niro in many movies. And he would talk about how De Niro obsessed over shirts.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
He would look at a shirt for maybe an hour. Just look at a shirt. Pick up another shirt. You know?
Well, you know who else talked about
But detail, I think, is important.
right.
And it's not just the shirt, but it's the detail. And there is detail in performance.
Let me say something about Harrison Ford. Kind of talked about what you wear is important, to your character. Because he said, certain clothes that you wear, you feel a certain way. And he talked about that with the characters that he plays. He's real hands-on with his costumes.
Yeah, and and that's why, going to loop back to the Socrates, even, like, if you're going to play Socrates, give me a beard, and give me a beard that looks like a Socrates beard. I worked with a really incredible person from the Chicago Lyric Opera. I mean, and she built that beard for me, but it's to be crude about it, you want to be a monkey, you get into the monkey suit, and all of a sudden you feel like you're walking around. I mean, that's one way of looking at it, but you do feel different when you get into clothing, and especially if you need to sort of make an adjustment, especially if you're playing. Like, I've never really done too many Westerns, but I did something for a friend of mine recently where it was a promo for something that he was working on, and I got to put on the Western garb and sort of walk down an old Western street in Southern California.
That's so cool.
Yeah,
so
it was
cool.
cool. And like, I'm the gambler guy in the Western. I'm never going to play but I'm the riverboat gambler type. So,
you talk about Westerns. I mean, is the Western, is that gone, you think? The idea of the Westerns in the theater, the movie theaters now? Because, like, Kevin Costner, I mean, they're not releasing the other part of was the one he just did. The second part, they weren't going to release it on because I guess box office numbers or just wasn't doing well, because I think it was going to be like a 3-part saga, if I'm not mistaken, the one he just had out.
I mean, I'm not a sociologist by nature, although, I fancy myself clever by half. I think that the nature of the Western is being changed by the nature of our society. I think people look back on the West and, the persecution of Native people.
Right.
And the whole, and then your one political faction is going to say, oh, well, you're too woke or whatever. It's like, well, wait a minute. There are things that we've learned about societies and how people, how things evolve. So I don't know whether you can actually do a Western like a Sam Peckinpah Western. And like, as much, and I think I have a friend that is just so enamored with the work that Kevin's been doing lately, and the failure of that second release. And I have a friend that was in the project. They're very disappointed. But I think we're also, with Coppola's movie Megalopolis, and we're also in a period of great transition. As always, show business is changing, but tastes are changing. And I don't think the Western is gone, but I think the Western is really undergoing some sort of a transition.
Yeah, God, I grew up on Gunsmoke, Bonanza. I'd watch that with my papu, my grandfather. Those was the Riflemen. Those are the ones I kind of grew up on back then. And you don't really see Western shows anymore.
No, and
TV shows.
But and I'm fond of watching old TV from time to time. But it's some of the issues are problematic, and I'm not even saying but like like what people did and how they behaved.
Right.
And that was just a matter of course. And you know, I've had that discussion about 16 Candles and certain things like in the movie, you know, the underwear and, you know, various stuff that people sort of wince at today. I'm not a big fan of the Long Duck Dawn stuff. I told
Really?
Getty, well, I always found it to be a little bit.
And the symbol that you hear in the
Yeah,
when
you know, that sort of stuff always struck me as being a little bit tad outre. You know, growing up Greek in Canada was, you know, like it's a little bit like hearing a bouzouki ring every time they mention my name.
Every time. Well, let's talk about that, and let's talk about John Hughes now and your time with him. How great was John Hughes? Well, why was he? What made him so great? Why is he so successful? And do you think that he could still be that successful today? Like, what do you think he would be writing about in today's world?
I wish
what do you think?
I wish he could observe it. I think he would have a keen eye about today. I think he would be writing about being a grandparent, and I mean about all the sort of. He would be writing, you know, similar stuff. I mean, I love Uncle Buck.
Oh my God!
I say that out
loud.
I do too. I love that movie, and I love Plane, Trains, and Automobiles. Now, my two favorite John Hughes movies are not the ones I'm in, but I do love the movies I'm in, and I happen to be in Ferris Bueller and was cut out of it. So I find that movie sometimes tough to watch, but I like it too. I think that John, and I've said this oftentimes, but I'll say it right now because it's worthy of repeating, John did not condescend to his teenage audience, right? And the films I grew up with in the 60s, Wild in the Streets, there was this one in the late 60s, they were all sort of made by old guys that were trying to cop on the 60s thing, not understanding it and sort of talking down to it and not really liking rock and roll culture.
Right.
You know, coming from a different generation. And like, it's sort of like if I was going to write a rap movie right now, it just wouldn't be right. It just wouldn't happen. You know, and not that, you know, I'm an older guy, but I don't understand the culture and it's not something that I really am. So a lot of that stuff I grew up with was so square and kids could smell it a mile away.
Right.
You know, I'm sure you could.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, and then, things came along like the Monkees that sort of worked and things like that. But Hughes came out of Lampoon. Lampoon came out of counterculture. So already there was this kind of twist on that. John, I don't think politically was incredibly left. He was probably more conservative and right-wing in a strange way, but he had the voice of teenagers and he had the way to sort of get inside the lingo and say stuff that, you know. And I remember going to the first screening of The Breakfast Club and just like the audience around me was just lit the freak up. And they were all kids. It was this huge suburban audience.
Right.
And I just remember turning to the people I was with going, wow, I don't think I got the zeitgeist of the moment until that moment where
So
I
how
felt
were they reacting? How are the kids reacting in the theater?
It was like a call and response. Like, you know, they'd say, you know, dweebs, whatever, the word dweeb, ZB or whatever, in Breakfast Club. But, you know, the reaction to the Bender, Amali relationship, the whole thing with the gun, and like when Brian gets serious and says, you know, I tried to kill myself, you know, and you realize the depth of the film at that moment. And kids were like effing relating to it, man. And I have to say it was kinetic. It was a sort of a kinetic response in the audience. And specific moments like, you know, when the principal when he lays into Bender, you know, we could just tell, you know, the lack of authority, the bristling of authority in the audience, you know. It was like, wow, this is a cultural moment. And it does not surprise me that the film lasts. You know, I have friends over the years, they have little kids, you know, gurgling little kids. The kids got 5, 10 years old, 11, 12. And then one day I'll get a call from them going, hey, you know, my son just saw The Breakfast Club. He's like 14 now, 15. He wants to speak to you. And all of a sudden these kids that
That's incredible.
and like go, yeah, hey, Uncle John, it's just like, wow. And then all of a sudden I have a conversation with them about the movie. Now they've come to the age where they're seeing it. And it happens over succeeding generations, friends, family, people that. And the movie still holds sort of a fascination. I don't know whether present day it's resonating as much. Yeah, I think it's fading a bit, but I think the message about we become our parents, I think, at the end of it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I mean, what did you glean from it?
Gosh, when it came out, I was about 10 years old. So I kind of saw it a little bit later. I probably saw it when I was in junior high. And, I guess I was too young to kind of get it at the time.
Yeah.
But when I watched it, of course, later in my adult years, I was like, gosh, this is what's happening. I mean, this is how kids are right now. These are the issues that they are facing, and this is real. And I think, and that's why kids resonate, because these are not superheroes they're watching. They're like, wait a minute, I'm getting bullied in school, or I'm having trouble trying to kind of find who I am, my own identity. And
right.
And I mean that's what I got from it.
Yeah.
Right. And did y'all kind of realize what you had when you were making it? Did y'all?
I don't think. I mean, I honestly don't think at the very moment I was doing it. Yes, I thought it was very special and it was exciting that I was doing it. But did I realize the cultural impact it would have? No. Did I realize that it was going to be well received? Perhaps. What I did know is that John had a lot of support behind him,
Mm-hmm.
From the studio, from Hollywood, and there was a lot of, financial backing, and so that it wasn't going to go quietly.
So he could, at that time, he could kind of write his own check for the most part, right? Because I mean, everything he was writing was just golden.
At that moment, he had gained a particularly strong foothold in Hollywood and was really, really moving gangbusters into sort of a full production slate.
Mm-hmm.
I would say by the late 80s, John had a few, I wouldn't say, he was spreading himself out pretty thin. And he had a director, Howie Deutsch, that was doing projects of his, and he had a big team working for him. But I think that, Hollywood changed so much in that period of time that I don't know, I think that he underwent sort of at the end of it a little bit of a disillusionment, I understand.
Do you think it's because, did kids change to where he just, I guess, maybe couldn't identify with the way he was able to, with his other movies? Was it just kind of different generation that was kind of coming around in the 90s where he was just like, well, I don't really identify with this group as I did.
I can't really speak to, a lot of that. I think what changes people most, that people really can't, from the outside, like you and I, comprehend as clearly,
mm-hmm.
is success.
Right.
And what success does to people. Opportunities arise, things are offered to you that perhaps look attractive on the face of it, but perhaps aren't what you should do, the strongest suit, maybe not the best move at the moment. People have different agendas or have conflicting agendas. So, and money becomes,
right,
a factor.
Right.
And John had a style of filmmaking that maybe would be a little bit more, I don't know, I couldn't really speak to today, but he shot on film, as we did,
mm-hmm.
as opposed to video, and he had a high shooting ratio. In other words, he'd shoot a lot. You know what a shooting
mm-hmm.
ratio is like? To every take you use in the movie, you might shoot 15 takes or 3 takes or whatever. So he had a pretty high shooting ratio. And that was kind of his way of working. So you'd shoot X number of takes is written, and then if you were working with an improvisational actor, whatever, then X number of takes not is written. And, from those moments you'd glean gold or not.
Right.
But whatever you did, there were lots of takes done. And to that end, the studio sort of went, the more success he had, sometimes the more money he'd make, but then sometimes the less the films would make money. And there was always this sort of, tug about.
Right.
And, I think at the end of it, he got pretty tired of the purse strings. But I don't think there's really been a book written about John, has there?
Not that I'm aware of.
That really analyzes his, because he was a bit of an enigmatic creature, and
he wasn't going to write any kind of a memoir or anything like that.
Hell no.
Yeah.
He was very, as I said, enigmatic, a tad secretive, and also capricious. Mm-hmm. Not entirely off with his head, but if people didn't work to his liking, you wouldn't see them around him the next day.
So you obviously, he liked you obviously because you were in 3 movies of his, but then you worked with Anthony Michael Hall in all 3 of those movies as well. Was that by design? Or
I was in for a while. Well, somewhat by design. I mean, I think in retrospect, I don't know whether there was an explicit design, but I mean, he had his teams and people he liked to work with and people he trusted. Obviously, he got, he loved to use John Candy and, there were people that would reoccur in his films. He liked working with Second City people, like my friend Mark Beltzman and Mike Haggerty, people I knew that other actors who worked in his movies. John was habitual in that regard. But, when Hollywood gets his teeth into you, I think that, I think by the time we were doing Denos and Menace and stuff like that, it was, I don't know, there were other winds at work in John's life. And, I think that ultimately it's a very hard road for originals in Hollywood.
We're seeing that right now.
A lot of the imitators sort of.
What do you think about, we'll come back to that. What do you think about the remakes going on right now? Remakes or reboots and all that?
Well, Tommy, it's been going on a long time.
But it feels like it's getting more notice now, though. More talked about now, it seems like. People, I guess probably with social media, people are commenting about it all the time now. Whereas you probably didn't hear about it as much before.
Well, I've never really been a fan of the reboot, the remake, but it's the MBAs and the bookkeepers saying, okay, this is what works and this is what's safe and this is who we know is going to like this. I would prefer a lot more original product, but there's a lot of stuff online. On streaming now, there's a lot of good new stuff.
You said a key word, safe.
Oh, yeah. Well, the safety issue is such that, they're going to do another show with insert name here of, and do X number of seasons of Frasier, right? Mm-hmm. I like Frasier, but even David Hyde Pierce didn't want to do it anymore.
Yeah.
The thing that you see happen with a lot of actors is I did this show for X number of years. Now I'm going to go do something different. They can see what I can do, and they go out there and they try something, and people don't like what they can see, what they can
100%
do.
right.
And then they come back X number of years licking their wounds, and after they've sold their house and their 15 cars and divorced and filed for bankruptcy, they're ready to come back and maybe, a friend of mine once said, if you want to look at a house in Hollywood, see whose show got canceled, and 6 months later, their house is on the market.
Mm. That's a good way to think about it.
It's like,
think about that. Wow.
I'm not telling any real estate person in LA, John Douglas or wherever otherwise that it's something they don't know. But there's a sense of truth of that. That And you don't want to get caught up in the vortex of like, oh, I'm making $1 million a week. That means I have to spend 700,000. You know.
Yeah. So, I was going to say, well, Eddie Murphy. God, I love Eddie Murphy. There's nothing against Eddie Murphy, but when he came back to do Saturday Night Live and he hosted, and he did Gumby again, and he did Buckwheat, it just didn't have the same. Because that was 1 million years ago, and this generation probably didn't see.
And I'm guilty.
I love Eddie Murphy.
I'm guilty of it. I did my old routine at this thing, the Second City routine. But I got to say, you got to move on, and I think that remake-itis is something that we got to get over.
Real quick, going back to Breakfast Club, we're going to have to wrap up soon, but I have a real fun fact. I went to Chicago my second time to Chicago, and I wanted to go see movie locations, so I decided to go see the high school. But of course, it's a police station, right, on the outside of it. I take a couple pictures. It looks exactly the same. This is my hand to God. I get back in my car, turn the radio on. What song do you think is playing?
Don't You Forget About Me. Simple Minds.
100% right.
The Lord was looking down on you, Tommy. He gave you the opportunity.
It was the craziest thing. I want to touch real fast on, not spend too much time, but you worked with Robert Downey Jr. in Weird Science. Could y'all see back then kind of what was ahead for him at the time?
I didn't do any active scenes with him.
No.
I mean, I met him a few times around the theater. He came to Second City, and you never know who's going to pop.
Yeah.
You never know who's going to pop. I mean, had I been nicer to a few people on the way up, had I known that Prince William was going to be Prince William, no. But I think that in a lot of ways, he is an example to me of a person who's extremely talented and has kept, despite his distractions, has managed to get back on it. And he's very, very talented, and he's driven. But he's also a showbiz kid. Comes from
his dad. Yeah.
There's a lot of my dad had a clothing store. I mean, I wish I had more experience in terms of the advice I was given, but. I think he's very talented. I had no idea at the time, though, that he was going to be, I had no
crazy
beat into the future. I met Michael J. Fox when he was about 12 years old, and in Ontario, in British Columbia, when he was doing a show called Leo and Me, and I thought this kid is really good.
Oh yeah.
So and it never surprised me.
I mean, because you could tell from he just seemed very mature.
Yeah.
For his age, he seemed like a very mature person. Like he had it, kind of put together at the time.
So Tommy, when are we going to do this again?
Whenever you want. Let's do it again. Let's do it soon. I hope you're enjoying it because I have so much more to talk about. But we'll kind of get into the last few bits here. I know we're kind of up against it right now. But let's talk about Too Hip for the Room, your album.
My album.
From Carpuzzi.
And it's
Carpuzzi
doing very
Records.
well. And people love it. I'm going to be going out probably with a band in the spring in Chicago, Cleveland, Toronto, and doing shows. And developing now sort of a little bit of patter and stuff that I'm going to be doing along with it.
One song that stood out to me was I Think I Love Your Wife.
I wish I was married.
I wish I was married. Oh yeah.
I wish I was married to your wife.
Yeah. that was quite buy his album. You can get it on Apple, iTunes. It's Spotify, so good. I listened to the whole thing in one sitting. It's so good. Do you have a process? Do you have a process when you act? Like when you get a script or kind of what's the first thing you look for when you get a script?
Aside from how many lines I have, what I look for is what is the character, and if the character is something that is I can explore and find the problem in the character and work it out and make it mine. And if it's a friend of mine used to say, within your wheelhouse, I try to make sure that my wheelhouse is large. For the most part, I really read about who it is. Mm-hmm. If it's a fictional character, I read about it. If it's a character in the book, if it's a character that has a book attached, if it's a screenplay from a book, I read as much as I can. And then I memorize. And then I get the words in my bones, and then I think about it a lot. My process is on the set to be as malleable and free to be off book. In other words, have the words in my head so that I allow myself just to behave as I were speaking. Because the most difficult thing about acting is to recreate, verisimilitude, recreate reality in a way when people aren't thinking about what they're saying next,
Because you hear, I think Christian Bale, like Daniel Day-Lewis, all those guys, and but they're more like, I guess, method. You're not. I mean, that's something you definitely don't do, right? You're not a method actor.
I use a method, but method is often misconstrued. It's a very deep thing. I mean, I have a way of feeling the part, and I employ. I've been acting for 50 years now, so I mean, it's kind of in my bones. There's a distinct method I use, but it's acting. Talking about acting is like talking about swimming. Sometimes you just got to get in there.
Just got to get in there and do it. Have you ever been so just locked in the scene you're acting that you're just not even really thinking about that you're actually acting? Like it just seems all too real.
Internal Affairs was that moment with Richard Gere in the scene where he's molesting my wife.
Yep.
That scene was freewheeling and up, and it was like the weirdest time I've ever. I mean, weirdest when I say it was like it was just sort of all there. And when I watch the scene, it's like it's a transformative thing. Like, was I really there?
Oh, it's tough to watch.
Yeah,
it's such a great movie. If you've never seen it, please watch it. It's so good. You're so good in it. So let's do this. Let's do a part 2. What do you think? We'll come back because there's so much more I want to talk about. You heard it right here. We're going to do a part 2. We're going to get a part 2 done. I'm going to be back here. We're going to get it done because there's so much more I want to touch on. So much more.
Part 2 is going to be better too.
Part 2. This was awesome. I hope y'all enjoy. I know he was. You can see why I wanted to have him on. He's amazing. Go on his IMDb, look up his resume, watch everything that you can, because like I said, there's so much more I want to talk about, and I want to come back and do this.
As the Greeks say, thatapume.
So that is a wrap for the premiere episode of the Tommy Denos podcast, and what a way to kick it off. Thank you again to Melrose Podcast for hosting. Guys are always amazing. You can follow me on Instagram, YouTube, and the TikTok at 3 Tommy D. And follow the Tommy Denos podcast on Apple Podcasts. And please review and comment. We got a lot of stuff coming up. We have a part 2 coming up, as you just heard. Also, a huge Evcharisto Poli. Thank you very much, my friend.
You got it.
To the legend, Mr. John Kapelos. Where can people follow you, John?
I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. The John Kapelos. You can find me. I'm out there.
I love it. And happy Thanksgiving to all of you. And we'll see you next time on the Tommy Denos podcast. And as always, you want something, go get it. Opa.
Baby, don't you forget about me. Don't you forget about